All right, so right now we're joined by Chief State's Attorney Rich Colangelo. And Rich, definitely want to thank you for talking with us about what's a very important issue and one that I think isn't talked about enough, especially recently. There was an epidemic that's been going on here in Connecticut and across the country even before there was a global pandemic, which is what we've been talking about a lot. And when we're talking about the opioid epidemic, I think there's a spotlight that needs to be put on that issue. So with that being said, we all know about what happened recently in Hartford with a 13-year-old who overdosed on what was pure powder fentanyl. So Rich, I just wanted to start with that question and to get your thoughts on, what were you thinking and what were you feeling when you heard about that tragedy?
Thanks for having me, man. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I mean, it is just that the first thought was it's a tragedy. I thought about my kids. I thought about everybody else's kids. I mean, this is something that should have never happened. And then, it kind of switches in my brain, the prosecutor in me, and says, okay, well, who's responsible? And can we hold them accountable? And that's kind of that's my first was thoughts to family and my family, my kids, and everybody else's. As everybody else thought of that and saw it and said, this is a terrible tragedy. Look, we have to prevent this from happening again.
Is there anything that you can share about the investigation? I do know that Hartford police executed a search warrant on that 13-year-old's home, and very little has been said about what they might be looking into or what they even discovered. Can you shed any light on that?
Unfortunately, I can't. I mean, I can't discuss any pending investigations. That investigation will be handled out of the Hartford State's Attorney's Office, so that they would have the details on that, and they probably wouldn't talk to you about a pending investigation anyway.
Something you just said. How do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? That's a great question, and one that I'll flip right around on you. So how do we make sure it doesn't happen again?
We need to make sure, and Connecticut is doing an okay job, I think, in treatment. Years ago, the legislature made possession of all drugs or illicit controlled substances, misdemeanor. So they've reduced the penalty for people possessing narcotics or controlled substances. And that I understand addiction, and I understand that we need to treat people. But what do we do for the people that are supplying those drugs? I mean, we have a sale of narcotics statute that potentially could apply. In the Division of Criminal Justice's legislative package this year, we're proposing a drug-induced death section to be added to the manslaughter in the first-degree statute. Similar to other states across the country, there's dozens of states that do it or have it right now. Connecticut doesn't. So what the statute would allow us to do is to prosecute for a manslaughter in the first degree, recklessly causing someone's death, the individual or individuals that provided the drugs to someone that caused their death. In years past, Connecticut, it used to be a capital felony in Connecticut to provide drugs to somebody that ultimately killed someone.
Some people would call that murder by overdose, and it could be thought of as you have these two people who are addicts, right? And one of them ends up dead the next morning, and the other person didn't mean for that person to die. So you're still saying that you think that a murder charge in that case would possibly be warranted?
Well, it wouldn't, again, not murder, it'd be manslaughter, for recklessly causing the death. And it is a state's attorney. When I was state's attorney in Stamford, we prosecuted these cases when they came to us. You look to see who provided the narcotics and where did they come from. Hopefully we could make that connection. And again, a lot depends on the autopsy report and what the finding is from the medical examiner or the toxicology report. So there are some instances, though, where yes, it would be another addict that is prosecuted for someone's death. If they supplied those drugs and those drugs caused the death of another person, they should be held responsible for that. At least that's the society that I think we live in.
I just want to pose a hypothetical to you. Let's say it's a friend or a family member who gets those drugs for somebody else and ends up causing the overdose. Sometimes they may have obtained those drugs to prevent that person from withdrawal or the dangers of a street buy. So should they be locked up for that?
No, I mean, and one of the things that um, prosecutors have is discretion. And in looking at that situation that you just described, that is not a situation where I think the person would, um, be incarcerated as a result of what you just described. I mean, but those are things that, every case is different. The prosecutor has to look at um, the actors involved, the situation, and the, uh, circumstances surrounding it.
So I think what you're getting at there as is nuance. And so I want to ask you about that. Do you think that the way that Connecticut laws are right now, that we have enough nuance that's built into them to be able to get addicts help while we're also pushing, for the distributors to be punished and at the same time getting justice for a family that's grieving someone's loss?
That nuance that you talk about is prosecutorial discretion. So there are prosecutors that work for the Division of Criminal Justice every day that are using that discretion exactly as you described. I mean, each office is headed by a state's attorney that's a very experienced prosecutor that, leads their office usually by example, all of them. All 13, I could say, lead by example, and they are doing exactly what you said. I mean, there's not a case that goes through one of our offices or one of our courts in Connecticut that a prosecutor is not using that type of discretion on. So yeah, I'm very confident that that'll continue to happen.
But how far does that discretion extend? I mean, does Connecticut have any mandatory minimums that would need to be followed?
It depends on the situation, and it depends on how this crime gets legislated or enacted. Um, there is a mandatory minimum for homicide, for murder. There isn't a mandatory minimum for the different, for manslaughter in the second degree. There's no mandatory minimum. For manslaughter in the first degree, there is no mandatory minimum. So, I know the legislature is trying to kind of get away from those mandatory minimums, and I think prosecutors have a way of working around them if they don't believe they're appropriate by charging something else, or not charging the charge that that maybe carries a mandatory minimum. So that all falls within the discretion that prosecutors are using and utilizing every day.
Rich, I'm curious how you see the new legislation that you guys are proposing jiving with the current Good Samaritan law that Connecticut has, which we know can shield someone from prosecution of possession if they call for help for either themselves or for somebody else. But that Good Samaritan law, and correct me if I'm wrong, it does not necessarily extend to homicides, right?
That's correct, and that's something that we'd have to look at legislatively, and if the legislature is policy-wise wants to include that in that law, if they do seem fit to, or deem fit to look at the proposal that the division is making, and they want to do that, it's something that we'd have to look at. I don't want to chill any of the Good Samaritan things that we're doing. I mean, you never want to see someone punished for doing the right thing, and calling and getting somebody help is doing the right thing. So we want to make sure that we still allow that to happen, and that's something that I would make sure that is still in place if this law ultimately did get enacted.
Rich, as we talk about overdose prosecutions, what kind of an impact do you think they really have on the street level stuff that we're seeing? I mean, do they really go far enough in deterring the dealers and the people who peddle opioids? And do they ever lead to high-level suppliers?
I mean, that's a really tough question. Looking back at my career as a prosecutor, for every person that I prosecuted for sale of narcotics, was there somebody there following up and probably standing on the same street corner? Yeah, there probably was. So, I mean, I don't know. Anecdotally, I could talk about it, but statistically, I haven't looked at the stats. it is a concern, right? I mean, that's something that we have to look at. But one of the things that this does is it gives that victim's family it holds somebody responsible for their loved one's death, right? Because that person, they wanted to chase that high. They're an addict. They wanted to get that same feeling that they got when they, got their last package of heroin or package of whatever it was. They expected it to be the same way as the last time, not knowing that this time that they got something that was not heroin, it was synthetic drug. It was fentanyl. It's, multiple times more powerful or potent, and it results in their death. So I think this will go a long way to, give the victims some closure and hold somebody responsible for their loved one's death.
Understood, but you're not saying in any way that this is a problem that we can arrest our way out of, right?
No, absolutely not. I mean, and it's not a short answer is no, right? We need treatment. We need to make sure that the people that are getting arrested for possession of narcotics are given an opportunity to get treatment. Unfortunately, as a prosecutor, I've seen that unless someone is ready to say, "Hey, I have a problem and I want treatment," we're gonna, you can't force somebody into treatment, right? You make them go, and I've seen people fail over and over again because they're not ready. And you know what? We as prosecutors can do everything we possibly can to say, "Hey, this is the right thing." Their family could come to us and talk to us about getting their loved one help, and we could try to do that. But unless and until that person is ready to get that help, the system can't do anything about it. And that's unfortunately the system that we live in. So no, we're not going to be able to arrest ourselves out of it. And we should still continue to try and provide help and support for the individuals that are struggling with addiction.
Rich, do you have any insight on, our law enforcement investigators, when they arrive at an overdose scene, how do they process that scene? Are they trained, instructed, taught to look at every overdose scene as a homicide scene?
That's something that we started looking at or doing in Connecticut probably 6-7 years ago, right? And when I was state's attorney in Stamford, I got all my police departments together and said, "Hey, this is what we want to do." I know the federal authorities are doing it also in Connecticut. We want to look at it and we want to gather all the information we can, right? We want to get the cell phone of the individual that overdosed. We want to see if we can connect somebody that supplied those drugs to the drugs that caused death. That's been happening for probably, like I said, the last 6 or 7 years now.
Okay, so this piece of legislation that you're proposing, why do you think it is so important?
Well, there are some jurisdictions that are charging manslaughter in these circumstances. If the toxicology report comes out and indicates that someone died of a heroin or fentanyl toxicity, some jurisdictions aren't, because they don't believe that they have the ability to prove it. In order to prove it right now in Connecticut, we'd have to show that the person recklessly caused someone's death, and in that they knew what the results of providing somebody narcotics could do, and it's more difficult to do. As I said, there's dozens of states that have codified this already. So what happens in Connecticut if the prosecutor doesn't charge a manslaughter? Then we're just dealing with the sale of narcotics and punishing someone that way. It's a hollow. I've had victims' family tell me that this is a hollow experience for me, that they pled guilty to the sale, that they are not culpable. If there's nothing saying that they caused the death of my loved one. I've had numerous conversations with victims' families around that specific instance, and this will allow us to punish the actions of the individuals that provide the narcotics that cause the death of someone, and it is a penalty that is greater than the sale of narcotics. And another thing for victims, and with our truth in sentencing laws here in Connecticut, sale of narcotics is a 50% crime. So somebody is eligible for parole after serving 50% of their time. For a manslaughter, it would be an 85% crime, is my understanding. That would fit into that category of crime.
Is there an age component to that piece of legislation?
There isn't. Again, I am open, and we just had a meeting with the legislative chairs of the Judiciary Committee at the beginning of the week, and I just gave this to them. We are open to discussing this proposal with anyone and everyone that would like to discuss it. We feel that it is appropriate, and it's something that we were working on, and we started this package back in October, November, and it's something that I discussed with our legislative liaison back then before Hartford happened.
How do you think that the pandemic has affected the opioid epidemic, Rich? I mean, this is the focus in the media and the national narrative has been so much on COVID, and this epidemic existed long before COVID, and some would say even exacerbated it. So, how do you think the pandemic has affected the opioid epidemic?
And I don't think that there's nothing in everyday life that the pandemic hasn't affected. If you want to look specifically at the opioid epidemic, individuals that are addicted with the pandemic are now more isolated even more. It's harder for them to, and if they are addicted and they're struggling with that addiction, not being able to work, not being able to have that social interaction, I could only imagine how difficult that is, as it is for everyone. So yeah, I mean, I believe it has increased what we're going to see. Just as I said, the pandemic has affected everything in life, right?
Is it this opioid epidemic? Is it affecting people younger and younger? I mean, we just saw what happened to a 13-year-old. Is that an anomaly, or is that becoming more common?
One thing that I, just looking at the cases that I've handled throughout my career, drug addiction runs across all classes, socioeconomic, all races, all jurisdictions, all people. So the fact that it's getting, hitting younger kids, is that surprising? Unfortunately, it's not. I mean, it is happening all over. I mean, it is something that we as society have to deal with.
Rich, is there anything else that you want to say that you think is important for people to know on this topic?
I think we covered it all. Thanks, Matt.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. Chief State's Attorney Rich Colangelo, thanks a lot.
Have a great day.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Rich. That ends.